London is about to spend £750 million to move two ancient markets. And that's only the start of the disruption. Because while the public fixated on the price tag, something far more revealing was happening inside the decision rooms. A scramble to save thousands of years of tradition before the old foundations gave way. For nearly 8 centuries, Smithfield Market has traded meat near the heart of the city, and for generations Billingsgate has hauled in London's fish supply from popular. But rising costs, crumbling infrastructure and stalled attempts to modernise pushed the City of London Corporation toward a drastic move. The original relocation plan to shift everything to Dagenham Dock collapsed under spiralling expenses and political friction. That failure forced the city back to the drawing board, and after months of negotiations with traders, planners and the Greater London Authority, they locked onto a new site, Albert Island, a 10-hectare stretch in the Royal Docks, right beside London's City Airport. The estimate is 750 million in projected economic activity, with 2,200 new jobs and a complete rebuild of London's wholesale supply chain. In one decision, London isn't just moving markets, it's redrawing where the city's food economy begins. But the real story emerges when you look at what forced this pivot in the first place. Before Albert Island was even an option, an entire project nearly died in Dagenham, because behind the optimistic press releases was a quieter unravelling, with numbers shifting, deadlines slipping and faith draining out of the room, long before anyone admitted it publicly. To move to Dagenham Dock had been pitched as a neat consolidation. One giant complex for Billingsgate, Smithfield and Spitalfields. But as contractors dug deeper, the cost surged past initial forecasts. Environmental constraints multiplied, and the legal structure binding the markets to their centuries-old sites proved far harder to unwind than anyone expected. The project ballooned, deadlines scattered, and the key stakeholders began drifting away. Traders complained that they weren't being heard, the local council hesitated, and the City of London quietly realised it was staring at a financial pit with no obvious bottom. By early 2024, the plan collapsed entirely, leaving the market stuck, frustrated and still deteriorating. The failure didn't just delay the future, it created the pressure cooker that would shape every decision that followed. And in the vacuum that Dagenham left behind, a very different opportunity started to form. Albert Island arrived, like a rescue plan, but it came with its own risks. Because while the site looked perfect on paper, the ground underneath it carried decades of industrial baggage. With political ambition and unresolved questions, no one wanted to confront too early. The Royal Docks, once a powerhouse of global trade, had spent years in regeneration limbo. The Greater London Authority needed an anchor, something big enough to revive the area's stalled momentum. So when the City of London came searching for a new home for the markets, the GLA pitched Albert Island as a ready-made solution. A blank canvas near the runway of City Airport, with space for modern logistic hubs, cold chain infrastructure, and even a new shipyard and a marina. Traders were promised more room, better transport links, safer facilities and ununified operations under the names New Smithfield and New Billingsgate. It wasn't just a relocation, it was a chance to reinvent wholesale trading for the 21st century. But this wasn't simply a new address, it was a political handshake tying the future of two ancient markets to one of London's biggest regeneration bets. And that's where the fight over the old sites began, because moving the markets wasn't just about where they're going, it was about London wanting to do something with what they left behind. And suddenly, centuries-old buildings stopped looking like Asian infrastructure and started looking like prime real estate with a story attached. Smithfield's Victorian structure, a cultural landmark sitting steps from St Paul's, had already been earmarked for transformation. Plans were revived to turn the site into a mixed cultural district, home to New London's museum, exhibition spaces and commercial developments. Meanwhile, Billingsgate Waterside plot in Popular became one of the hottest redevelopment opportunities in East London, with early proposals hinting at thousands of new homes. What had been industrial necessity for generations flipped overnight. into urban potential, and the decision to relocate the markets unlocked billions in long-term value for the city and for developers. This move wasn't just a logistical, it was the key to unlocking two of the most valuable pieces of land in the capital. But the people who keep these markets alive had their own perspective. For traders, this wasn't a regeneration story, it was a gamble for their livelihoods. Because while politicians spoke in numbers and projections, the people hauling crates at 3 AM were calculating something far more personal. Traders from both markets had spent years in limbo, first preparing for Dagenham, then watching that plan implode, now being asked to rebuild their businesses again. In the Royal Docks, many supported the move, drawn by the promise of modern facilities, along with safer working conditions and a unified hub that could strengthen the supply chain. Other people feared that the increased distance from central London would disrupt their deliveries, change customer patterns, and add costs that they couldn't absorb. Meetings grew tense, with petitions circulating, and even as most traders signed on, many did so with anxiety rather than enthusiasm. For them, this wasn't an architectural project, it was survival. Their support, fragile, conditional, necessary, is the hinge on which the entire relocation depends, and it leads straight into the question London hasn't fully answered yet. Because the 750 million headline masks a deeper calculation London still hasn't resolved. A calculation that weighs heritage against development, local jobs against local ambition, and the city's past against pressures shaping its future. The city predicts 750 million in local spending, with 2,200 jobs and modern supply chains that strengthen London's food distribution. But the relocation requires parliamentary approval to override centuries-old legislation, tying the markets to their current addresses. Planning permission must navigate environmental constraints, with transport redesigns and the complexities of operating next to an active airport. And every delay increases the costs. Supporters call it an investment in the city's future economy, while critics call it an expensive gamble but an optimistic forecast. Both sides know one thing: there's no going back to the way the markets used to be. In the end, the project's success will be measured not in the building, but in whether London's food ecosystem emerges stronger or more fragile. Because the moment this plan moves forward, the next challenge comes into focus. The decision to uproot Smithfield and Billingsgate reshapes more than just two historic sites. It reshapes how London feeds itself, how it develops the land, and how it balances a millennium of tradition against the demands of a modern city. This Royal Docks bet could pay off spectacularly, or stumble under the pressure of weight in its own ambition. And as the approvals and designs and deadlines begin tightening, the city is heading towards a point where optimism will eventually have to meet reality. But the real tension is just beginning, because even if the markets were to reach their new home on time, the next battle is already forming. What happens when London tries to build a 21st century distribution hub inside one of the most politically sensitive regeneration zones in the country? If you enjoyed me breaking down this story, then make sure that you like the video and subscribe to my channel for more.